the first time Grace Whitman dared to wear her mother's short navy dress again. The town stopped talking about the storm and started talking about her. The hem barely brushed her knees, scandalous by Harbor Point standards. Yet it wasn't the fabric that startled people. It was the way she stood in it, spine straight, eyes clear, as if she'd finally remembered who she was before loss made her quiet. No one knew that pinned inside that dress was a note from years ago. Wear this when you decide to live forward. And no one, not even the billionaire who once bought half the town, was ready for what would happen when she finally did. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe now. Let's begin. The morning air at Harbor Point smelled of salt and wet pine. Gulls wheeled above the harbor, their cries echoing against the cliffs. In the small white house at the edge of Seaview Road, Grace Whitman waited for her coffee to finish brewing. The kitchen window fogged as the first light stretched over the water, thin and silver. 52 degrees, maybe 53, the kind of chill that made her wrap her cardigan tighter, even inside. She cradled the mug between her palms, listening to the percolator click off. Every morning began this way: coffee, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint chatter of the radio that never quite reached full volume. Routine steadied her. Routine had carried her through 5 years of widowhood, through holidays marked only by casseroles left on the porch, through board meetings at the community house where she pretended numbers were more urgent than memories. But today, the rhythm wavered. On the counter lay a letter from the roofing company. Estimate $38,200. She read the figure again. The storm warnings predicted heavy rain within 48 hours. If the roof failed, the after-school room would flood. The pantry would be ruined. The seniors' quilting club would have nowhere to meet. And she had no backup plan except tonight's fundraising gala hosted by the Harrington Foundation. Grace exhaled slowly. She'd rather clean gutters in the rain than stand under chandeliers asking strangers for help. Still, the kids deserved a dry ceiling. Pride could wait. Her phone buzzed a reminder for 7 p.m. Lighthouse benefit. Dress formal. She almost laughed. Formal. Her closet held nothing but sensible shoes and gray cardigans. Somewhere in the back of her mind, her mother's voice whispered, "You own something beautiful. Don't forget it." Grace set her mug down and climbed the narrow stairs to the attic. Dust floated in the slanting light. Against the far wall stood a cedar chest, the one her father had built before shipping out to Vietnam. She hadn't opened it since her mother's funeral 15 years ago. The hinges sighed as she lifted the lid. The scent of cedar and thyme filled the air, sharp, comforting, intimate. Inside lay folded quilts, yellowed letters, and on top, wrapped in tissue paper, the navy dress. Her breath caught. It was shorter than she remembered, the fabric still soft, still faintly perfumed with lavender sachet. She held it up by the shoulders. The hem brushed just above her knee, scandalous by her standards. Pinned to the collar was a slip of stationery in her mother's careful script. Wear this when you decide to live forward. Grace sat back on her heels. Her throat tightened. The handwriting looked so alive it hurt to read. For years, she had lived backward, measuring life by what had ended instead of what remained. Live forward, her mother had written, as if knowing her daughter would need the instruction. She closed her eyes, remembering the last time she'd worn a real dress 10 years ago. Her husband David's promotion dinner. The memory of his laughter brushed past, light as dust. She pressed the fabric to her chest, feeling foolish and exposed even in an empty attic. Downstairs. The clock chimed 9. The storm would hit tomorrow night. The gala was her only chance. She carried the dress to her room, laying it across the bedspread. Sunlight shifted through lace curtains, catching on the navy sheen. She ran her fingers along the zipper. Could she still fit? The thought drew a small, incredulous smile. When she finally stepped into it, the lining whispered against her skin. She turned toward the mirror. For a moment, she didn't recognize herself, shoulders straighter, collarbones visible, hair catching light like threads of gold she'd forgotten she had. She laughed under her breath, startled by the sound. Then came the tremor of doubt. "You're almost 40. Grace, people will talk." Another voice, quieter but firmer. "Let them." She tried the zipper. It stuck halfway. She twisted, cursed softly, then tried again. The teeth caught, slid upward with a sharp hiss, and suddenly she was zipped in. The fit wasn't perfect, but it was hers. She stood there, breathing hard, heart pounding as if she'd run miles. Something loosened inside, not joy exactly, but a small, defiant pulse of life. She imagined walking into the bright hall tonight, not as the widow who runs the pantry, but as herself still standing, still capable of light. Downstairs, the wind picked up off the harbor, rattling the panes. She heard the gulls again, sharper now, like laughter turned wild. Grace looked at her reflection one last time. "All right, Mom," she whispered, forward. She hung the dress on the closet door, letting it sway slightly in the draft. The scent of cedar lingered in the room. Outside, a bank of gray clouds gathered over the Atlantic, moving steadily toward the coast. Grace tightened her cardigan, poured the last of her coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with a notepad. She wrote down names of donors, notes on the roof estimate, the phrases she might use if her voice didn't shake. Then she drew a line beneath them and added 3 words: "Just be real." For the first time in years, she felt both terrified and awake, a woman standing at the threshold of something uncertain but necessary. When she glanced again toward the hallway mirror, the navy fabric caught the corner of her vision, a dark gleam of possibility waiting patiently for nightfall. And though the storm still built far offshore, she could already feel the first faint tremor of rain against the glass. Cole Harrington's convoy rolled down Harbor Point's main road just after noon. 3 black SUVs, spotless against the salt-streaked storefronts, hummed past the old cannery and the shuttered mill. The windows of the mill were fogged with dust. Letters from its faded sign, Harrington Textiles, still visible through grime. A decade ago, he had bought the property for a fraction of its worth, promising jobs that never returned. Inside the first SUV, the air smelled faintly of new leather and ocean brine seeping through the vents. Cole rested an elbow on the door, eyes hidden behind dark lenses. His phone buzzed in his palm, another congratulatory message about the upcoming Harbor Point revitalization plan. He ignored it. Beside him, Evan Mallory scrolled through spreadsheets on a tablet. "You'll like the numbers," Evan said. "Projected ROI in 5 years, maybe less. If zoning holds, we're calling it the Docks at Harbor Point. Has a good ring." "Right." Cole didn't answer. He was watching the mill fade in the rear view, a ghost of promises unkept. From the second row, a smooth voice cut in. "People will forgive eventually," said Laura Kent. Her blonde hair was tied back, her tone perfectly even, the kind that sounded calm but calculated. "Once they see jobs and tax revenue, the story changes. Just smile and say partnership. It plays well on camera." "Partnership," Cole repeated, tasting the word like a foreign language. Outside, fishermen were unloading crates by the pier. He caught glimpses of faces weathered, curious, guarded. Someone nudged another and pointed toward the motorcade. Their expressions held no welcome. He'd been here once, briefly, years ago, long enough to see how easily power built distance. Evan leaned forward. "Your remarks at tonight's press preview are set for 8 minutes. The community house section is small, just a note about potential relocation for green space." "Relocation?" Cole turned his head. Evan swiped the map onto the screen. The red zone covered 10 waterfront acres, piers, warehouses, parking, a block of small gardens behind a white clapboard building labeled Harbor Point Community House. "It's marginal land," Evan said. "We compensate, they move, easy," Laura added. "We'll spin it as modernization, better facilities for public use." "I can draft the language." Cole's jaw tightened. "How old is that building? 70s, 80s? "It's not historical. Outdated HVAC. Poor insulation." Cole stared at the map, at the clean lines cutting across familiar streets. Sometimes outdated means beloved, he said quietly. Neither of them replied. The convoy slowed near the roundabout. On one side, banners read, "Welcome to Harbor, point home of the Lighthouse Festival." On the other, boarded shops leaned against the wind, painted slogans fading into the clapboard, "We still believe." Evan cleared his throat. Public meeting tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. The mayor's neutral, but the councilman Ray Sutter wants visibility. He's vocal about the mill closure. Expect posturing. Cole nodded absently. His attention had drifted beyond the glass. Through the drizzle, he saw the community house for the first time. 2 stories, paint peeling to bare wood, but the porch was lined with flower boxes still green despite the cold. Children's drawings, boats, handprints, crooked rainbows covered the windows. A group of volunteers stacked canned goods by the door. One of them was a woman with auburn hair pulled loosely back, head bent in concentration. She was directing traffic like a conductor, smiling, sleeves rolled to her elbows. Even from the moving car, something about her presence, the calm certainty of motion, cut through the gray. Cole lowered the window a few inches. The scent of the sea rushed in, sharp and familiar. The SUV rolled slower, as if the driver sensed his interest. Evan looked up. Problem Cole didn't answer immediately. The woman laughed at something a child said, then turned toward the street. For half a second, her gaze brushed the line of black SUVs. Her smile faded not into hostility, but recognition of who they must be. The outsiders. Cole closed the window. "No problem," he said, just remembering what a small town looks like when it still belongs to its people. Laura shifted her tablet. "And when we finish, it'll belong to them and to the future. That's the point. Maybe," he said, "or maybe it'll just belong to the highest bidder." The silence that followed was heavy enough to fill the car. They crossed the bridge into the downtown loop. On one corner, a boy on a bicycle stopped to watch them pass. On another, an elderly man raised his cap slightly, uncertain whether to wave or warn. Cole glanced back once more at the community house, now receding behind trees and telephone wires. Its porch light flickered in the gray light, like a heartbeat refusing to go out. "Evan," he said finally. "Yeah, don't touch that building until I've walked it." Evan blinked. "It's not on the tour. It is now." Laura sighed. "Cole, you realize optics matter. If you're seen favoring one property, the others will. Then they'll wait," he said, voice even but final. Outside, the rain thickened, the wipers swept slow arcs across the glass. The convoy turned toward the hotel at the bluff, passing more shuttered stores. A church with a half-lit cross. A signboard that read, "Soup Drive, tonight, everyone welcome." Cole's reflection in the window looked older than he expected. 10 years ago, he'd thought building things made him whole. Now he wondered if what he'd really done was replace meaning with concrete. In the rearview mirror, the road curved back toward the harbor. A white clapboard building stood stubborn against the wind, its windows bright with children's art. For a moment, before the turn hid it from view, he thought he saw that same auburn-haired woman step outside and look after them, her expression unreadable in the mist. Something in his chest gave a slow, unfamiliar twist. He turned away, pressing his thumb against the edge of his phone until the screen lit again, spreadsheets, emails, the language of control. But behind the numbers, the image of that faded building refused to leave. By the time the motorcade reached the hotel drive, the first drops of cold rain had begun to tap against the windshield, steady and insistent, like a question waiting for an answer. The lighthouse benefit shimmered under 1,000 tiny bulbs strung from the rafters of the old boathouse. Outside, the tide whispered against the dock, gentle and insistent. Inside, the sound of glass and laughter mingled with the low hum of a jazz trio. The air smelled faintly of salt, candle wax, and the perfume of people pretending everything was fine. Grace Whitman stood at the entrance, feeling the cool brass handle in her palm before she let go. The navy dress clung differently than she remembered. She tugged once at the hem, resisting the urge to retreat. The moment she stepped through the door, conversations slowed, heads turned not cruelly, not kindly, just curiously. A few smiles, a few lifted brows, the inevitable murmurs. She offered the greeter her invitation. Grace Whitman, Community House. Of course, the woman said, scanning the list with professional brightness. You're at table 7, near the windows. Lovely spot, lovely spot. Grace almost smiled. Lovely was a word for someone else's evening, not hers. But she nodded and moved toward the tables, heels clicking softly on the old wooden floorboards. She caught fragments of talk business, weather, foundation gossip. Her shoulders tightened. Around her, women shimmered in sequins and men in tuxedos loosened ties just enough to look effortless. She reached table 7. A group of local teachers waved her over, relief in their eyes that she had come after all. You look beautiful, one whispered, eyes wide. Another, braver, added, he'll see what we see now. Grace didn't ask who he was. She busied herself with the name cards and the breadbasket, trying not to think about her reflection in the wine glass. Across the room, near the podium, Cole Harrington stood surrounded by donors and city officials. He wore the same expression he used at board meetings, polite, distant, mildly tired. The mayor clapped him on the back, laughing too loudly. Cole smiled on cue. Laura Kent adjusted his tie and whispered last-minute notes about tone and phrasing. He'd spoken at 100 events like this. Always the same pattern numbers, optimism, applause. But tonight, as he stepped onto the small stage under the soft blue lights, something in the crowd caught his eye, a figure near the bay windows, standing slightly apart. A woman in a short navy dress, the color of twilight before rain. The light behind her turned her hair to copper flame. He hesitated, microphone in hand. He couldn't see her face clearly, only the stillness of her posture, the quiet grace of someone both self-conscious and unwilling to leave. Then he began, "Good evening, everyone. It's a privilege to be here in Harbor Point." His voice carried easily, practiced. He spoke of revitalization, of progress, of opportunity, words polished smooth by repetition. The applause came where it always did. And yet, as he scanned the room, he saw that woman again, seated now, hands folded on the tablecloth. She wasn't smiling. She was listening truly, listening as if weighing the difference between what was said and what was meant. Cole's throat tightened for a reason he couldn't name. After his speech, the MC announced an open floor for community representatives. Anyone wishing to speak about local initiatives, please feel free to share. A shuffle of papers, polite laughter, silence. Then a chair scraped softly. Grace rose. Her pulse thundered, but her voice, when it came, was steady. "I'm not on the schedule," she began, "but since this gathering is about community, I'd like to tell you what that word sounds like where I come from." The room quieted. Even the clink of cutlery stopped. She spoke without notes, describing the community house, how veterans repaired wheelchairs in the basement workshop, how seniors taught teens to sew quilts from old uniforms, how the pantry kept lights on for families after storms. "It's not just a building," she said. "It's the one place left in town where no one asks what you used to do before the mill closed. They just ask if you're hungry." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The jazz trio stopped playing entirely. Grace looked toward the row of executives, Evan Mallory, Laura Kent, and finally to the man standing behind them, tall, motionless, his gaze fixed on her. She didn't know his name, but she knew his kind suits, promises, distant concern. Still, something about the way he was watching made her hesitate. His expression wasn't polished or detached. It was startled. She continued, quieter now. "If redevelopment means losing that, then progress might cost more than we think." The microphone trembled faintly in her hand. She thanked the crowd and stepped back. For a moment, there was only the sound of the sea against the dock. Then applause slow, deliberate, breaking like a small tide. Cole realized he'd started it. He didn't know why he was clapping first, only that not clapping would have felt dishonest. Others followed, The room, uncertain at first, warmed to her honesty. The applause grew, spreading until even the officials who'd looked ready to frown joined in. Grace blinked, surprised, a flush rising in her cheeks. She nodded once and returned to her seat, hands trembling under the table. Cole remained standing by the podium, watching her. When she glanced up, their eyes met properly for the first time. Recognition struck not of faces, but of something deeper, the shared fatigue of people who'd both carried too much for too long. He wanted to look away, to reassemble his practiced expression, but couldn't. Laura leaned close, whispering, "Sit, smile." He didn't move. Grace turned back to her friends, forcing a small smile, though her mind still raced. She hadn't planned any of it. The words had just spilled out, honest and bare. And now, as the crowd shifted back into chatter, she felt something strange, an ache that wasn't fear, exactly, but anticipation. Outside, the tide rose higher, brushing against the boathouse pilings with a steady rhythm, like a heart learning to beat again. Cole left the stage a few minutes later, his notes forgotten on the lectern. From across the room, he saw her laugh at something one of her friends whispered. The sound reached him faintly through the music. It hit him harder than any applause ever had. He told himself it was nothing, just admiration for a brave local woman speaking truth to power. But as the lights dimmed for dinner, he found himself scanning the crowd again, searching for that navy blue shimmer by the windows. When he spotted it, his breath caught, sharp and involuntary, like the first draw of air after too long underwater. And before he could stop himself, he was already wondering who she was. The jazz trio eased into a waltz, the kind meant for couples who knew exactly when to turn and when to let go. The floorboards of the old boathouse creaked under polished shoes. Candlelight shimmered across glassware and the low tide beyond the windows. Grace Whitman gathered her clutch from the table. She had spoken, she had survived, and that was enough. The hem of her dress brushed against her knees as she rose. One of her friends whispered, "Leaving already?" "Before I trip over my own bravery," she murmured with a smile. She'd almost reached the door when she heard a voice behind her. "Ms. Whitman." She turned. Cole Harrington stood a few steps away, tall in the soft blue light, jacket unbuttoned, bow tie loosened. His expression was polite, but there was a hint of something else. Curiosity, perhaps gratitude. "Mr. Harrington," she said, keeping her tone even. "The band insists I make an effort on the dance floor," he said, "and I was told it's bad optics to refuse. Would you help me with appearances?" The phrase hung between them. Grace hesitated. Dozens of eyes, or at least the feeling of them, pressed from the tables nearby. It would look friendly, cooperative, harmless. She nodded once. One dance. He offered his hand. She took it. His palm was warm, steady. They stepped onto the floor as the waltz swelled, slow and measured. Neither spoke for several beats. The rhythm gave them something to hide behind. Then, almost casually, she said, "So, what brings a billionaire to our leaky roof?" He smiled faintly. "FEMA guidelines. Apparently, roof pitch, hurricane straps, community resilience. It's all very glamorous." Grace laughed under her breath. "Nothing says romance like disaster mitigation." "I'll remember that," he said. "You handle the community house, right?" "Yes. And a dozen people who think I do it all wrong. I know the feeling." Their eyes met briefly. The turn of the dance brought them close enough for her to catch the faint scent of cedar and sea salt on his suit. When they spoke again, their voices had softened. "I was impressed by what you said earlier," he said, "about what the house means." "Impressed," she echoed. "That's a polite word for inconvenient." He gave a quiet chuckle. "Maybe, but honest. We need more of that." They circled once more, steps aligning almost too easily. Grace could feel her pulse steady to the rhythm. Around them, other couples smiled for photos, moving in practiced loops. She noticed how different his hand felt on her back, not possessive, not hesitant, just present. People think we're from different planets, she said. You build things. I try to keep what's left from falling apart. Maybe that's the same job, he said. Different budgets. The corners of her mouth lifted despite herself. You have a good line for everything, don't you? Only when I'm nervous? Are you nervous now? He met her gaze. Yes. The answer caught her off guard. The next turn came too soon. Her shoe brushed his, and she almost laughed from surprise. At least you're honest, she said softly. Before he could reply, a voice cut through the music. Well, look at Harbor Point tonight, big wallets and short hems. The music didn't stop, but the mood shifted like a current. Grace felt the words land. She didn't have to look to know who said them. Councilman Ray Sutter approached with the swagger of someone who thought charm excused cruelty. His wife followed 2 steps behind, smiling tightly at the floor. Evening. Ray, Grace said calmly. Grace, he drawled. Didn't expect to see you playing hostess for the Harrington crowd. Thought you preferred bake sales to ballrooms? She drew back from Cole slightly, but not far enough to let Ray see her retreat. Just trying to make sure the roof over your voting district doesn't collapse. A few people nearby chuckled nervously. Ray's grin widened. Good thing you found a man who can buy new shingles by the truckload. The words were slick with insinuation. Grace's cheeks burned, though she kept her voice cool. You're out of line, Councilman. Cole's hand tightened slightly at her waist. He looked at Ray, not angry, exactly, but clear, steady, like a man accustomed to being obeyed. Ray, he said evenly, you just embarrassed yourself in front of your constituents. Ray blinked. Excuse me, Cole didn't raise his voice. If you want to talk budgets or contracts, call my office Monday, tonight, show some respect. The space between them crackled, around them. Conversation stilled. Someone clapped softly at another table, the awkward sound of relief disguised as applause. Ray laughed once, brittle. Didn't mean anything by it. Then you won't mind apologizing, Cole said. A long beat. Ray muttered something close to sorry and backed away toward the bar. His wife exhaled and followed him. Grace stepped out of Cole's hold. That wasn't necessary. It was, he said. She looked at him, half grateful, half uneasy. Now, half the town thinks you rescued the damsel in distress. I didn't think you needed rescuing, he said quietly. Just back up. The band shifted to another song. Conversation resumed in fragments, like a room exhaling. Grace adjusted the strap of her purse, her composure returning in measured breaths. Thank you, she said after a moment. You're welcome. She hesitated, then added with a faint smile. But next time, I'd prefer to do my own fighting. I'll try to remember. They stood near the edge of the dance floor, the music soft behind them. For a moment, neither moved. Then Grace nodded toward the exit. I should get home before I turn into a headline. He looked as though he wanted to say something more, but didn't. Good night, Ms. Whitman. Good night, Mr. Harrington. She walked toward the open doors, where the wind carried in a trace of salt and rain. Outside, the harbor lights swayed on the dark water. She drew her shawl tighter, feeling the cool air on her skin, the thrum of adrenaline still in her chest. Behind her, the waltz continued without them, a melody of what-ifs echoing softly through the boathouse rafters. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she wished she'd stayed for one more song. The storm hadn't arrived yet, but the wind was already prowling along the eaves of the Harrington rental on Bluff Road. Waves hit the rocks below with a low, rhythmic pulse. Inside, the lights glowed too bright for the late hour. Coffee steamed untouched beside stacks of blueprints and zoning charts spread across the long oak table. Cole Harrington loosened his tie and stared at the site map projected on the wall. Blocks of pale gray represented the proposed docks at Harbor Point. The legend in the corner read Phase 2, Community Access and Parking Facilities. A white rectangle at the center caught his eye. Existing structure to be removed. He knew what that structure was. Evan Mallory leaned back in his chair, exhausted but focused. We need to finalize tonight, he said. Investors want the plan by sunrise so they can review before the market opens. Sunrise, Cole repeated quietly. Laura Kent perched at the other end of the table, tablet balanced on her knee, hair immaculate even after 16 hours of meetings. Cole, I understand the optics of demolishing a community space sound tricky, but it's one building, and we're offering relocation funding. The story can be shaped. Cole didn't look at her. What does relocation mean? A new site 3 blocks inland, Laura said smoothly. Modern, efficient, better plumbing. We'll headline it as Community House 2.0. People like progress. Parking near the waterfront, meanwhile, is non-negotiable. She enunciated the last word as if sealing a contract. Cole folded his arms. Non-negotiable, he echoed, each syllable flat. Who decided that Laura's smile didn't waver? The analytics did. Traffic flow, tourist projections, safety codes. It's simple math. Evan interjected before the silence grew too thick. Look, the deck funds itself through commercial leases. Without it, we lose our anchor tenant. Investors pull out. We're back to square one. You can't build revitalization on sentiment. Cole's gaze lingered on the glowing map. The little white rectangle looked smaller than it should, like an afterthought. Yet when he closed his eyes, he saw what filled that space earlier that day, the hand-painted murals in the windows, the chipped railing, the woman with the auburn hair giving directions to volunteers. Grace Whitman, he said under his breath. Laura's head tilted. Who? No one, he replied too quickly. Evan tapped his tablet. So, do we lock this version? Cole leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Show me the traffic flow overlay. Evan blinked. You've seen it. Show it again. He complied, projecting the dotted red lines, arrows funneling toward the waterfront. Cole traced them with his finger in the air. These 2 lanes here, they cut through the garden and the east parking lot of the community house. Right? That's correct. So the relocation isn't optional. Evan sighed. Not unless we plan to make parking inconvenient, which defeats the whole, Cole cut him off, market red line. Evan hesitated, meaning Cole stood, voice low but firm. The community house remains. For now. Laura set her tablet down with a controlled click. Cole, that's not a solution, it's a stall. Then consider it a strategic pause. Investors will see hesitation as weakness, she warned. They'll ask if you're losing focus. Maybe I'm finding it. The 3 words hung in the air, quiet and deliberate. Evan rubbed his temple. I'll make the note, but you're asking for a war. The town might like you for it, but the board won't. I'll take that chance, Cole said. He looked out the window. Below, the harbor lights flickered across the black water. The air outside was restless, the kind of night that hinted at weather turning. Laura rose. You've always said, emotion clouds efficiency. Don't start breaking your own rules now. Maybe they needed breaking for a moment. Something human flickered in Laura's expression. Concern. Maybe disbelief. Then it vanished behind professionalism. Fine, she said, but you'll have to justify it in the morning call. Evan shut down the projector, muttering, We're back to revisions at 2A. Cole stayed standing. He heard the soft scrape of chairs, the rustle of paper, the thud of a closing door as Laura left. Evan followed a minute later, already dictating notes into his phone. Silence returned to the house, thick as the fog crawling over the glass. Cole exhaled, slow and heavy, then walked to the sideboard. He poured an inch of bourbon, not for the burn, but for the pause it gave him. On the table lay the latest report on community assets. He flipped it open. The pages smelled faintly of ink and rain. None of his team had marked them. At the bottom of the stack, a stapled document bore the title, Community House Profile, Nonprofit Operations. He turned the first page. A summary paragraph caught his eye. Program Director Grace Whitman. Staff, 4. Volunteers, 47. Funding gap, $38,200 roof repairs. Urgent. Estimated flood risk high within 48 hours of major storm event. He read the numbers twice. They lined up too neatly with what he'd seen earlier in the day, the leaking gutters, the sagging ceiling. The building wasn't symbolic. It was functional, necessary, alive. He leaned against the table, rubbing his jaw. The bourbon glass sat untouched, non-negotiable, Laura had said. But every instinct in him, the same one that had built his fortune by spotting what others overlooked, told him some things couldn't be traded or paved over. He reached for his phone. The clock read 11:12 p.m. He typed slowly, each word a decision. Walk through tomorrow, I'll listen. He stared at the message for a moment before hitting send. The reply came within 2 minutes. 8 m. We open at 7:45. No greeting, no exclamation mark, just facts, direct and clear, the language of someone who kept promises. He smiled faintly, setting the phone down. Outside, a gust rattled the window pane. The first drops of rain splattered the glass. Cole looked again at the file, at the map glowing faintly from his laptop screen. The white rectangle in the center no longer looked like a line item. It looked like a choice. He switched off the lamp. The room fell into darkness except for the lights across the harbor, wavering like small, stubborn stars. The morning broke gray and damp, the air holding the scent of salt and rain. Cole Harrington parked across from the community house, windshield wipers whispering back and forth. The building looked smaller than it had from his car window the day before, smaller but alive. A hand-painted sign over the door read, "Welcome Home." The paint faded, but the intent still clear. At 7:52 a.m. He stepped out of the SUV. The wind off the harbor tugged at his coat. He glanced up at the roof shingles missing, gutters sagging, yet the porch was swept clean. He could already hear voices inside, laughter and the scrape of chairs. Grace Whitman met him at the door. She wore a raincoat the color of driftwood, her hair pulled back. "You're early," she said, as if mildly impressed. "You said 7:45, he replied. "I'm late." She looked him over for a moment, then held the door open. "Come in before you freeze." Inside, the air was warm with the smell of coffee and oatmeal. A bell above the door jingled softly as it closed behind him. The floors were old pine, polished by decades of footsteps. Along the hallway, paper hearts and painted fish hung from strings, fluttering in the draft. "This way," Grace said. "We start with the big room." She led him into a wide hall where sunlight fell through tall windows. A group of seniors in sweatpants stood in a loose circle, following the slow movements of a Tai Chi instructor. Their arms lifted and fell like waves. Someone's hearing aid squealed briefly. Someone else laughed and adjusted it. "Every Tuesday and Thursday," Grace said quietly. "Doctor says it keeps their joints moving and their tempers soft." The instructor spotted her. "Morning, Miss Grace?" "Morning." "Carl," she called back, roof still holding. "Mostly," he said, and everyone chuckled. Cole found himself smiling before he realized it. The seniors waved at him without asking who he was. He nodded, a little awkwardly, and followed Grace to the next room. "This used to be a storage closet," she said, pushing open a door. Inside, 6 toddlers sat in a half circle on a carpet shaped like a giant sunflower. A young woman read aloud from a picture book about a duck who lost its way. The children shouted the rhyming words they knew, their voices a tangle of joy and impatience. Grace crouched beside a boy clutching a toy truck. "Hey, Mason, you remember to share today." He grinned, missing 2 front teeth. "Mostly." Cole lingered by the doorway. The sound of those small voices filled the room with something he couldn't name, a reminder of noise that wasn't machinery or construction, but life. When Grace rose, she noticed the look on his face and said simply, "We call this the little harbor. Parents work shifts at the dock. We keep their kids dry." She led him down the hall, stopping at a heavy door with a keypad. "Pantry," she said. "We lock it because some folks are too proud to ask for help in daylight. So, they come after hours." She keyed in the code and opened it. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with canned vegetables, pasta, and bags of rice. A pair of men in flannel jackets were unloading boxes from a van through the back door. Both wore old military caps, their movements practiced. "Morning, Grace," one of them said, saluting half playfully. "Shipment came early. Morning, Walt. You met Mr. Harrington." The older man looked up, brow furrowing as recognition dawned. "The developer guy." "That's one way to say it," Grace said before Cole could speak. Walt grinned. "Well, sir, if you're building a grocery on the waterfront, hire us. We're efficient." Cole smiled faintly. "I'll keep that in mind." The veteran turned back to the boxes. "We're just paying it forward," he said. "Once you've stood in a line for food, you don't forget how to hand it out." Cole's throat felt tight. He nodded, not trusting his voice. Grace shut the door gently and gestured toward a narrow staircase at the end of the hall. "Upstairs," he asked. "Just one more thing to show you." The stairs creaked as they climbed. The air grew cooler, tinged with dust and lemon polish. At the landing, the hallway widened into a small lounge filled with mismatched chairs and a piano missing 2 keys. Along the far wall stretched a collage of photographs, decades of faces, children with painted cheeks, volunteers in aprons, families at picnics. Some were faded to sepia, others new and glossy. Grace watched him take it in. "We call it the Wall of Hands," she said. "Everyone who's helped or been helped leaves a handprint and a picture." Cole stepped closer. There were hundreds of hands, blue, green, yellow, overlapping like waves on sand. Beneath each, a name written in marker. He stopped midway down the line, eyes narrowing. A black and white photograph caught his attention. A nurse in a heavy parka, snow swirling around her, knelt beside a teenage boy on a stretcher. The boy's face was pale, blood smudged on his forehead. Behind them, a wrecked pickup rested in a drift of snow. For a long moment, the room fell away. He remembered the cold of that night 20 years ago, the blizzard on Route 1, the spinning headlights, the silence after impact. He'd been 17, reckless, stupid. A nurse had found him half conscious and stayed with him until the ambulance came. She'd wrapped her coat around him, whispering, "Breathe, son. You're going to make it." Her name tag had read, Evelyn Whitman. He looked closer at the photo. The handwriting beneath the handprint read, Evelyn 1978-2006, forever helping. His hand dropped to his side. He started, then stopped. Grace was watching him, puzzled by the change in his expression. "You knew her." Cole swallowed hard. "I know. The name? My mother's name was Evelyn, too." She smiled faintly, unaware of the truth pressing behind his ribs. "Then she had a good name." He nodded, forcing a breath. She did. They stood in silence, facing the wall of faces. Downstairs, the muffled sound of laughter drifted upward, mixed with the faint notes of the piano being tested. Grace spoke first. "Now you've seen why it's not just a building." Cole managed a small smile. "You were right," he said. "It's a heartbeat." For a moment, neither of them moved. The light from the narrow window fell across her face, softening the lines of fatigue. She seemed both strong and fragile, like the place she was fighting for. He wanted to tell her the truth, that her mother had saved his life once, that he owed a debt he'd never repaid, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and handed her his card. "Thank you for the tour," he said quietly. "It won't be wasted." When he turned to leave, his hand brushed the photograph again, fingertips tracing the edge of the nurse's parka. The image blurred as his vision stung, though he blamed it on the dust. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the flagpole. The first scent of rain carried through the open doorway as he stepped onto the porch. Somewhere behind him, a child laughed, the sound rising clear and bright above the coming storm. By mid-afternoon, the wind had shifted. The gulls that usually screamed above the harbor had vanished inland, and the sky had turned the color of pewter. A no AA alert blinked across every phone in town, nor'easter approaching, gusts up to 50 miles per hour. Expect 2 to 4 inches of coastal flooding. Grace Whitman stood at the front door of the community house, clipboard in hand, hair whipping across her face. The air smelled of ozone and seaweed. Behind her, volunteers moved quickly, stacking cots, taping windows, laying sandbags in uneven rows. "All right, people," she called over the noise. "If it's not bolted down, move it upstairs, food first, blankets second, and someone find the first aid kit that disappeared after last time." A dozen voices answered at once. The building hummed with nervous energy. The storm would hit by nightfall, but Grace felt the pressure long before the rain began. Inside, Walt and two other veterans rolled in crates of bottled water. "Got these from the supply depot," he said. "Might not need 'em, but better safe than sorry." Grace nodded. "Good work. When you're done, start checking the flashlights, batteries, not candles." Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She ignored it until she recognized the name, Cole Harrington. She hesitated, then answered, "Grace, do you have backup power?" His voice crackled through static. "No. Generator's been dead since last year. I'll send mine over," he said. "2 trucks, 4 men. They'll stay through the storm." "That's not necessary. It's already arranged." A beat of silence. She wanted to argue, but exhaustion won. "All right," she said. "Thank you. I'll come by in an hour," he added. She looked out at the blackening clouds. "Make it quick." When the trucks arrived, they came with more than equipment. Laura Kent stepped out of one, coat immaculate despite the wind. A cameraman followed her, holding a small boom mic. "Grace Whitman," Laura said smoothly, extending a manicured hand. "We appreciate your cooperation. Mr. Harrington wants to highlight the town's resilience, great local story. Wonderful optics." Grace's eyes narrowed. "Optics?" Laura gestured toward the camera. A few shots of the generators being unloaded. Volunteers working shoulder to shoulder. It helps humanize the effort. "I don't think humanity needs staging," Grace said. "Tell your crew to leave their gear outside." Laura's smile tightened. "You realize public support could double your donations?" Grace cut her off. "This isn't a photo op. It's a shelter. People come here because they trust we won't turn them into headlines." For a moment, the two women faced each other in the rising wind. Then Laura stepped back, eyes cool. "As you wish." She signaled to the cameraman, who reluctantly packed up. Cole, arriving just in time to witness the standoff, watched Grace's jaw set like stone. "I told her to clear it," he said quietly once Laura stalked off. "I know," Grace replied, "but she's used to people saying yes." "So are you," he said. She looked up at him. "Not lately." The first drops of rain fell, fat and cold. He helped the crew position the generators, sleeves rolled to his elbows. There was something grounding about the way he worked, not delegating, just doing. Grace found herself glancing at him more than she wanted to admit. By evening, the sky had turned nearly black. The wind screamed through the eaves. They had 30 people sheltering inside, families, fishermen, 2 elderly couples, and the mayor's secretary who lived in a flood zone. The community house pulsed with voices and movement. Grace walked the hallway with her clipboard, checking names. She paused at the doorway to the pantry, where she found Ray Sutter leaning against the frame, a folder tucked under his arm. "Councilman," she said, wary. "You're out late, doing my civic duty," he replied. "Heard you're hosting half the town tonight." She crossed her arms. "If you came to help, grab a sandbag." Ray smiled, slow and oily. "Actually, I came with paperwork. Might be time we helped each other." He opened the folder and slid a document toward her. "Land use understanding," he said. "A little pre-approval agreement for the redevelopment project. You sign. I make sure your funding goes straight to the top of tomorrow's emergency list. New roof, new paint, everything." Grace stared at the paper. "You're joking. I'm practical. It's a simple trade. Sign here. The board stops dragging its feet." She took a step closer. "During a storm warning, you come to blackmail me." He raised his hands in mock surrender. "Call it timing." "You're tired. You want what's best for your people? So do I. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. What's best for my people is not selling their home. He shrugged. The land's going to change hands. Grace, might as well get something out of it. Before she could answer, another voice cut through the hallway. What did you just say? Both turned. Cole stood near the stairwell, rain dripping from his hair. He'd come back to check the generator cables and must have caught the last line. Ray's smirk faltered. Private discussion, he said. Not anymore, Cole replied. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried. Put the paper away. Councilman? Ray squared his shoulders. You can't tell me how to conduct town business. I can, Cole said evenly. When my company's name is on that letterhead, you try to leverage this storm for signatures, you'll find yourself explaining it on record. Ray glared at him, jaw tight, then shoved the paper back into the folder. You think your money makes you a hero? Harrington? Wait till the next election? He stalked off down the hall. Grace let out a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. He's unbelievable. He's predictable, Cole said. And he's done. Rain hammered the roof now, so loud they had to raise their voices. Grace turned toward the doorway, scanning the room full of cots and restless children. We've got our hands full, she said. I can stay, he offered. You don't have to. I want to. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then she nodded. Fine. Grab a mop. The back door leaks. He smiled, just slightly, and followed her into the din of the shelter. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the plywood. Inside, light flickered from the generator, steady but uncertain. The storm pressed against the town from every side, and somewhere in that tension between wind and will, two people worked side by side, both pretending it was only about keeping others safe. The storm arrived like a living thing. By dusk, the nor'easter had wrapped Harbor Point in a wall of gray, its roar unbroken for hours. Waves slammed the breakwater hard enough to shake the windows 2 blocks inland. Inside the community house, every door groaned under the wind's fists. Power flickered once, twice, then went out altogether. Someone gasped, children whimpered, then, with a sputter, the backup generator caught, sending a low hum through the floorboards. The hall glowed amber again, powered by the 2 portable units Cole's crew had installed just in time. Grace exhaled and called out over the noise. We're okay. Everyone lights are staying on. Relief rippled through the crowd. The scent of soup and wet coats filled the air. Grace moved quickly between cots, checking on the elderly couple near the window, covering a sleeping toddler whose blanket had slipped. Her hair was damp, her sleeves rolled up, her hands never still. Cole was at the far end of the hall, kneeling beside the fuel drums, checking the gauges by flashlight. His suit jacket was gone, tie undone, shirt sleeves streaked with dust. A thin sheen of sweat lined his neck despite the cold. Generators steady, he told Walt, who stood guard nearby. Next refuel in an hour. Keep the vents clear. Aye, sir, Walt said, saluting with a grin before heading back to the pantry. Cole leaned against the wall for a second, catching his breath. He'd overseen hurricane shelters in cities before, but this felt different, smaller, more fragile, more human. Every face here had a story he didn't know yet, and somehow, that mattered. Grace appeared beside him, clipboard in hand. I heard we've got heat for another 8 hours. Give or take, he said. If we ration, then we'll ration. Her voice was firm but tired. He could see the strain around her eyes, the weight of responsibility, the quiet fear she wouldn't show anyone else. You should sit down, he said. She looked at him like he'd suggested she take a vacation. If I do, something will leak or break. Then I'll handle it. She gave a dry laugh. You don't know the difference between a sump pump and a soup pot. True, he admitted. But I can lift both. Their eyes met for a second longer than necessary. The air around them hummed, not just from the generator, but from something wordless, fragile, alive. Then a crash sounded from the back hallway. Grace's head snapped toward the noise. What was that? A child's voice shouted, distant and frightened. Mom? Grace was moving before anyone else reacted. Eli, she called, recognizing the voice of the 8-year-old whose mother was working in the kitchen. Cole, flashlight. He grabbed one from the table, its beam slicing through the dark as they ran down the corridor. The hallway smelled of damp plaster and cold metal. The wind outside howled like something alive. Eli, Grace called again. Honey, answer me. A muffled sob came from the stairwell door at the end. She pushed it open, her flashlight beam sweeping across the concrete steps. A small shape crouched halfway down, hugging his knees. Eli, her voice softened instantly. Hey, it's okay. The boy's face lifted, streaked with tears and fear. I dropped my truck, he said. It rolled down there. Cole moved first, taking the steps 2 at a time. He found the toy wedged against the wall, picked it up, and handed it back gently. Here's your rig, buddy. Good as new. Eli sniffled, clutching it tight. Grace crouched beside him, brushing damp hair from his forehead. You scared us. You know that he nodded, ashamed, didn't mean to. It's okay. Next time, just call. She took his hand, leading him upward. The flashlight beam trembled slightly in her other hand. When they reached the landing, she turned to Cole, her breath coming fast. Thank you. He shook his head. You did the hard part, but she didn't let go of his hand right away. The light from his flashlight caught her face, wet lashes, flushed cheeks, the glint of exhaustion and something deeper beneath it. For a heartbeat, the storm receded. The only sound was the generator's hum and the boy's small, even breathing between them. Grace realized she was still holding Cole's wrist, felt the pulse beneath his skin, strong, steady, grounding. She let go slowly. Let's get him back before his mother thinks we lost him. They walked down the hallway together, Eli between them, tiny hand gripping hers. The toy truck clutched to his chest. When they reached the main hall, the crowd broke into applause, quiet but heartfelt. Hero of the hour, Walt called. Cole smiled faintly. He did the saving. We just followed the noise. Eli grinned and ran to his mother's arms. Grace stood still for a moment, watching the reunion. The boy's mother mouthed thank you across the room. Grace nodded, eyes bright. Cole came to stand beside her. You run this place like a ship, he said softly. She looked up at him. A leaky one, still afloat, he said. That counts. A gust rattled the doors again, making the lights flicker. Grace's shoulders tensed instinctively. Hey, Cole said quietly. You're doing fine. She started to protest, but stopped. The words landed deeper than he knew. When the wind finally eased, they walked the rows of cots together, checking on sleepers, refilling cups of water, straightening blankets. Their conversation drifted into small things, where he'd learned to wire a generator, how she made the best soup out of nothing but carrots and patience. Near midnight, as the storm's rage softened to steady rain, Grace stepped onto the porch for a breath of air. The sky glowed faintly from the town's emergency lights. Cole followed, standing beside her under the dripping eaves. The silence between them felt like the eye of the storm, fragile, calm, temporary. She glanced at him. I didn't think you were the kind who stayed when things got messy. He looked at her, rain shining on his hair. Maybe I'm trying to learn. The porch light flickered again, and for an instant they were just 2 silhouettes in the half-dark, close enough to feel warmth, far enough to pretend it meant nothing. Then Grace stepped back, breaking the spell. We should check the fuel. Right, he said, his voice a shade too quiet. As they turned toward the door, thunder rolled far out over the bay, not angry now, just distant, as if the storm itself were moving on, but leaving behind the echo of what it had stirred awake. By dawn, the wind had fallen to a whisper. The nor'easter had passed, leaving Harbor Point wrapped in mist and the scent of wet cedar. Streets shimmered with puddles that reflected the pale gold of sunrise. The sea still grumbled against the rocks, tired but alive. At the community house, the night's exhaustion gave way to movement again, slower now, almost gentle. The storm had tested the building's bones, and somehow it was still standing. Grace Whitman stepped outside with a broom in one hand and a mug of coffee in the other. Her cardigan hung loosely over the navy dress, now flecked with white chalk dust and salt stains. The hem was torn where it had snagged on a cot frame during the night. She didn't care. Around her, people swept debris, hauled trash bags, and passed out pastries from the bakery that had reopened before the power grid had. Don't throw that out. She called to a teenager about to pitch a bucket of rainwater. We'll need it to rinse the steps. The boy grinned. Yes, ma'am. Inside, the smell of something suspiciously sweet drifted through the hall. Grace frowned. Please tell me that's not electrical smoke. It's pancakes, Walt called back. Sort of. She walked in to find Cole Harrington standing behind a folding table with a donated griddle, flipping lopsided pancakes that looked both undercooked and slightly charred at once. A crowd of amused volunteers hovered nearby, offering advice he mostly ignored. Grace folded her arms. You realize there's an art to that, right? He looked up, sheepish. I'm an investor, not a chef. Clearly. He flipped another one, sending a puff of steam into the air. It's edible, I think. You think she teased, accepting a plate. She took a bite, chewed, and winced. Needs character. He laughed, shaking his head. I was going for rustic. Then congratulations, she said. You nailed it. The laughter around them came easy relief, disguised as humor. People needed that sound this morning, the proof that they'd made it through. When Cole turned off the griddle, his phone buzzed with messages. Laura Kent stood near the doorway, immaculate as ever, though her heels were now splattered with mud. She didn't bother with pleasantries. Cole, she said sharply, I've been trying to reach you. The board wants updates. Investors are waiting. You shouldn't be cooking. He wiped his hands on a towel. Unbothered. People were hungry. That's not your job, she said. You're running a multi-million-dollar redevelopment project. You can't look like I'm part of the town, he interrupted, his voice calm but steady. Laura's jaw tightened. Like you've lost perspective. He gave her a long look. Maybe I've found it? Grace, watching from the sink, said nothing. She caught the flicker of disbelief in Laura's eyes before the PR chief turned on her heel and left, muttering into her phone. Cole exhaled slowly. She'll draft 3 press releases about this by noon. Make sure she spells pancake right, Grace said, and he chuckled despite himself. When the last of the volunteers drifted out to clean the sidewalks, Grace motioned for him to follow her upstairs. You should see the roof before the insurance folks do, she said. The second floor smelled faintly of mildew. The storm had peeled back part of the shingles. A pool of murky water shimmered across the old pine boards. Grace pointed to the sagging joists overhead. We lost 2 beams in the corner. I'll have to close the reading room until we shore it up. Cole ran a hand along the wall, feeling the damp plaster crumble beneath his fingertips. How long has this rot been here? Years, she said. We patch what we can, when we can. He turned toward her, his expression unreadable. What would it take to fix it right? She hesitated. I've seen estimates from 20 to 40,000, depending on the crew. Maybe more if they find hidden damage. Then it's done, he said quietly. Grace blinked. What, I'll fund it? He said simply. Roof, joists, everything. No conditions. She stared at him for a long moment. Outside, the rain dripped steadily from the eaves, the sound like slow applause. Cole, she said finally, her tone gentle but firm. That's generous, but donations don't erase bulldozers. He looked at her, startled by the softness of her voice, not angry, not ungrateful, just true. I know, he said. That's not what this is. Then what is it? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The truth was still forming inside him, fragile as the light slipping through the cracked window. Maybe it's what I should have done a long time ago. Help first. Argue later. Grace stepped closer, her voice low. People around here have heard promises before. I'm not promising, he said. I'm acting. She studied him for a beat longer, then nodded. All right, but I still want your crews nowhere near that garden until we talk about the plan. Agreed. They stood there for a moment, surrounded by the quiet drip of rain. A streak of sunlight slipped through the broken shingles, landing across her face. Her cardigan shimmered faintly in the light, the salt stains catching gold. Looks like we both got what we wanted, she said softly. And what's that? She smiled, a roof that leaks in daylight instead of darkness. He laughed, the sound low and unguarded. For a heartbeat, it felt almost easy between them. No projects, no politics, just two people standing in the aftermath. Alive. From downstairs came the sound of children arguing over syrup and the faint rhythm of Walt's radio crackling to life. The world, battered but intact, was finding its way back to motion. Grace turned to go, then paused at the top of the stairs. For the record, she said without looking back, those pancakes weren't terrible, just confusing. He grinned. Story of my life. Then maybe you're learning, she said, her voice already fading down the stairwell. He watched her go, the sound of her footsteps steady. Sure. The sunlight widened across the floorboards, touching the puddles until they glowed like small mirrors, fragments of sky finding their way inside. By Tuesday morning, Harbor Point buzzed like a wasp nest. It started with a single post on a local gossip forum, a photo of Grace Whitman in her navy dress, standing near Cole Harrington at the lighthouse benefit. The caption read, "Guess the roof comes with strings. Small town charm pays big city dividends." Within hours, more pictures appeared grainy. Opportunistic shots from the storm shelter. Grace in the dim hallway, hand on a child's shoulder, Cole behind her, flashlight beam cutting the dark. Someone had frozen that moment of care into accusation. By noon, Ray Sutter had shared it on his campaign page. His caption was short and poisonous ethics matter. Public funds shouldn't mix with private favors. Grace found out from a volunteer, a trembling 20-year-old who approached her in the pantry, phone in hand. "Ms. Whitman," the girl whispered, "you should see this." Grace didn't want to, but she looked, her face on the screen weary, windblown, caught mid-motion, paired with words she'd never said and motives she'd never held. For a long minute, she couldn't breathe. The hum of the refrigerator faded, replaced by the slow, cold rush of disbelief. Then she straightened, handed the phone back, and said quietly, "Thank you for showing me. Now, turn it off. We've got work to do." She spent the morning exactly as she had planned, sorting donations, coordinating cleanup crews, replacing soaked insulation. But the stares began. The whispers followed, some sympathetic, some curious, some cruel. At lunch, a local reporter knocked on the community house door. "Ms. Whitman, any comment on the rumors Grace didn't open the door?" "Not today," she said. "We're feeding families, not stories." She closed the latch and leaned against the wall, the tremor in her hands betraying the calm in her voice. Cole texted an hour later. "I just saw it. I'll handle this." She stared at the message, then typed back, "Don't. If you fight it, they'll say it's true. Let me handle my town." The reply never came, but she imagined his silence brimming with anger, not at her, but for her. By evening, the mayor's office announced an emergency hearing review of community house operations and potential ethical conflicts. It would take place at town hall the next morning. The headline ran before the dinner hour, "Storm Hero or Manipulator." Grace stayed late, long after the volunteers went home. She cleaned the coffee urn, wiped the tables, stacked chairs until the muscles in her back trembled. When she finally sat, she let herself feel it, the sting, the humiliation, the heartbreak of how quickly a story could twist. But when tears threatened, she thought of the photo wall upstairs of her mother's smiling face beside the children's handprints, of every person who'd leaned on this place when there was nowhere else to go. This house didn't start because people believed in perfection, she told herself. It started because they believed in need, and she would not let rumor bury that. The next morning, the sky was sharp and bright, as if the storm had scrubbed the air clean. Grace dressed simply, gray slacks, a white blouse, and her mother's silver pin shaped like a gull. When she walked out, volunteers paused in their work. "Want us to come with you?" Walt asked, stepping forward. "No," she said gently. "Stay here. Keep the coffee hot." He nodded, eyes glistening. "We've got your back, Grace." The town hall steps were crowded. Reporters jostled for photos. She heard the shutters click as she walked up, her chin high, shoulders square. She didn't flinch. Inside, the meeting room smelled of paper and disinfectant. Ray Sutter sat at the long table, flanked by 2 council members who looked uncomfortable but silent. His tie was perfectly knotted, his smile too smooth. Cole was there too, standing near the back. Their eyes met across the room. He gave a small, wordless nod, not asking permission, only offering steadiness. She returned it with a look that said, "I've got this." Ray cleared his throat theatrically. "Ms. Whitman, thank you for coming. Given recent concerns, we need clarity, specifically about your association with Mr. Harrington and the funds proposed for the community house roof." Grace approached the microphone. Her heels echoed once against the tile. She could feel the eyes, the cameras, the tension. Her voice, when it came, was clear and calm. "My association with Mr. Harrington," she said, "is the same as it's been with every person who's ever helped this town built on shared work, not whispered rumor." A murmur spread through the audience. Ray leaned back, unimpressed. "So, you deny that you've received personal benefit?" She smiled faintly. "The kind that carried both patience and pain. If you mean a dry roof over our seniors' heads and a safe pantry for our families, yes, those are the benefits, for all of us." Ray tried again, sharper. "You understand the optics, Ms. Whitman. You wore a dress he paid for, attended his gala." Grace's voice cut through his sentence, soft but firm. "That dress belonged to my mother. She wore it before she died, long before any of this. And I wore it to remind myself not to live afraid." The room fell silent. She took a slow breath. "I'm not here to defend my reputation. I'm here to defend a house that holds this community together. The one place where nobody cares how much money you make, or who you stand next to at a fundraiser. The community house doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the people who fill it." Her words settled like quiet thunder. Even the reporters lowered their cameras. Ray shifted uncomfortably, but the crowd had turned. A retired teacher stood up near the back. "She's right," the woman said. "You can't run a town on gossip." Applause followed, hesitant at first, then steady, rolling through the room. Cole didn't clap, not yet. He just watched Grace, eyes full of something between pride and awe. Grace waited until the sound died down. "You can keep your hearings," she said gently. "But I'll be at the house tomorrow morning when the doors open. Same as always." She stepped back from the microphone, her expression composed. The applause rose again, louder this time. As she left the hall, sunlight streamed through the tall windows, landing across her shoulders. Outside, the air was sharp and cold, but it felt like breathing after too long underwater. Cole caught up with her on the steps. "You didn't defend yourself," he said softly. "I didn't need to," she replied. "Truth doesn't panic." He smiled, small and shaken. "You amaze me." Grace looked toward the harbor, where gulls wheeled over the glittering water. "Then maybe you haven't been around enough small-town women," she said, and walked down the steps, head high, while the cameras followed her, not with ridicule, but quiet respect. The town council chamber was still, filled with the uneasy hush that follows too many hard words. Outside, Harbor Point shimmered under the first real sunlight it had seen in a week. The nor'easter had washed the streets clean, but the town's trust was still fragile thin ice over deep water. Cole Harrington stood near the front, his hand resting lightly on the back of a chair. He'd requested to speak at the public session, though Laura had begged him not to. "You don't owe anyone an explanation," she'd said. But that wasn't true. He did owe someone more than anyone here realized. The mayor cleared his throat. "Mr. Harrington, you have the floor." Cole took a slow breath. His voice, when it came, was quieter than usual, unarmored. "Last week, I came to Harbor Point with blueprints and projections. I thought I was here to build something new, but what I found was something that already worked, something worth protecting." Murmurs fluttered through the audience. He let them fade. "I've spent most of my life believing that numbers tell the story, that profit measures value. But a few days ago, in the community house, I saw a photograph that reminded me what value actually looks like." He glanced toward Grace. She sat a few rows back, still and attentive, her hands folded in her lap. He met her eyes briefly, then continued. The photo showed a nurse bundled in a parka, kneeling in the snow beside a wrecked truck. Her name was Evelyn Whitman. 20 years ago, during a whiteout on Route 1, she saved my life. The room fell completely silent. I was 17. Cole went on softly. "Driving home from a hockey game I shouldn't have played in. The roads were slick, visibility near zero. I went off the shoulder into a guardrail. By the time the ambulance reached me, I was hypothermic, half conscious, bleeding out from a broken windshield." He paused, the memory flickering behind his eyes. "I remember her voice before I remember the hospital. She kept talking, steady and calm, even when I told her I couldn't feel my hands. She wrapped me in her coat, pressed gauze to my chest, and said, 'Stay with me, son. You're going to make it.'" He swallowed, letting the words rest in the quiet air. I didn't even know her name until the police report came days later. Evelyn Whitman. By the time I tried to thank her, she'd moved on to another clinic. And then she passed, years ago. He looked at Grace again. Her face was pale, eyes shining with disbelief. "When I saw her picture on that wall," he said, "I realized I'd spent 2 decades trying to repay a debt I couldn't name, building schools, hospitals, scholarships, but never the one that mattered most. Because the person who saved me gave her kindness to the world, not to collect it back." A tear slipped down someone's cheek in the second row. The room stayed utterly still. "I didn't come here to clear my name or to play the hero." Cole continued. "I came to make something right." He turned toward the projector screen where the redevelopment map glowed faintly. "This was our plan," he said, pointing to the bright blue blocks. "Parking decks, retail frontage, high traffic corridors, efficient, profitable, and blind." He clicked the remote. The map shifted, red lines turned green, sections recolored. "This," he said, "is the new plan." A low murmur spread again as the crowd leaned forward. "The community house stays. Not relocated, not rebuilt elsewhere, preserved, restored, and ringed by green space. The parking deck moves 2 blocks inland to the old ferry lot. We'll provide shuttle service for visitors and vendors. And the waterfront parcels originally slated for retail will become a veterans' memorial garden and public playground, managed by the town." Someone whispered, "You'd give that land back." "I'm not giving it back," Cole said gently. "It was never mine to take." He set the clicker down. "This place, your place, has already given me something I didn't realize I'd lost. A sense of belonging that money can't buy." He let the silence stretch, unhurried. "So, to the council, if you'll approve this revision, Harrington Foundation will cover the full restoration costs of the community house and commit 10 years of maintenance funding. Not as charity, as thanks." The mayor cleared his throat again, but his voice caught slightly. "That's quite a statement. Mr. Harrington." "It's not a statement," Cole said softly. "It's a promise." He stepped back, the weight of the moment settling over him. For once, there was no applause, not yet. Only the sound of people breathing, processing. Grace rose slowly from her seat. The entire room seemed to turn with her. Her eyes met his across the distance, not glowing with triumph, not even relief. Just something deeper, recognition. She walked to the microphone, her steps quiet on the floor. When she spoke, her voice trembled at first, then steadied. "My mother would have liked you," she said. A ripple of soft laughter passed through the room, the kind born from released tension, from hearts remembering they could beat again. Grace continued, eyes on Cole. She believed people always have a reason for the good they do, even if they don't say it out loud. "Thank you for saying yours." She turned toward the council. "And thank you, on behalf of every person who ever stood in that building, for proving we're worth listening to." Applause started at the back, hesitant, then grew, spreading like light across water. Some people stood, even Ray Sutter, scowling in the corner, couldn't quiet it down. Cole didn't move. He just watched her, this woman who carried her mother's grace and her own kind of courage. When she looked back, there was something unspoken in her gaze, gratitude, yes, but also caution. As if to say, "I see what you're doing. Don't let it stop here." He nodded slightly, accepting the challenge. The applause faded, leaving behind a hush that felt almost sacred. Grace stepped down from the microphone, passing him as she left the podium. Their shoulders brushed. Neither spoke. Outside, the harbor bell rang once, faint and clear in the cold morning air, as if marking not an ending, but the first quiet moment of understanding between two people bound by one woman's long-ago mercy. The community house was closed for the night. Only one light glowed in the hallway upstairs, soft, golden, and steady. Outside, the harbor lapped quietly against the pilings. The storm debris long cleared. The air carried that sharp, clean scent that follows rain and forgiveness. Cole climbed the narrow stairs, footsteps slow on the worn pine. Grace had texted him earlier. "If you're still in town, stop by after 7. There's something I want you to see." She was waiting in the hallway when he reached the landing, sleeves rolled, her hair loose for once, shadows brushing her face. She smiled, not politely, not cautiously, but with the kind of gentleness that happens when anger and pride have both finally settled. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," he echoed. "I wasn't sure if you meant it." "I did." She turned toward the photo wall. "Come here." They stood side by side before Evelyn Whitman's picture, the same one that had stopped him cold days ago. The nurse's parka, the snow swirling around her, the boy she'd saved. Cole saw it differently now, not just as a frozen moment, but as an inheritance, one life reaching forward into another, quietly shaping what came next. Grace's voice broke the silence. "You know, I didn't understand that photo growing up. People in town used to tell stories about my mother, how calm she was in a crisis, how she made people feel seen. But when you're a kid, you don't see that. You just see someone who's gone too soon." She glanced up at him, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small, folded card yellowed at the edges, soft with years. This was hers. She said, "I found it in the cedar chest before the gala." He recognized the neat handwriting instantly, the same script from the note in the dress. She handed it to him. The paper read, "Wear this when you decide to live forward." He traced the words with his thumb, careful not to tear the fragile page. "She wrote this for you." Grace nodded. She always thought I'd get stuck looking back. And she was right. After she died, I lived in gray cardigans and safe choices. That night at the gala, that was the first time I'd worn color in 15 years. I thought it was just a dress. Turns out it was a dare. Cole's throat tightened. It worked. She laughed quietly, maybe too well. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the pictures on the wall catch the glow from the single lamp. Children's faces, volunteers, years of small kindnesses captured on cheap paper and tape. He finally spoke, voice low. "Can I tell you something I didn't say at the hearing?" She looked at him. "Of course. When you gave that speech at the gala about the community house, I couldn't breathe." He smiled faintly, self-conscious. "Not because of the dress, or maybe partly that, but mostly because you spoke like someone who still believes in what I used to, before I started measuring life in profit margins." Grace tilted her head, studying him. "You really listened, didn't you?" Every word, he said. You reminded me that people build things with their hearts first. Money just follows after. If you're lucky. She smiled, small and soft. That's not something most men in your shoes would admit. I guess I'm not most men. No, she said quietly. You're not. The air between them thickened, not awkward, just charged. The hum of the old refrigerator downstairs, the faint creak of the roof settling, the scent of cedar still lingering from years of storage, all of it wrapped around them like a held breath. Cole looked back at the photo. You know what I think now? That your mother didn't just save my life. She rerouted it. Every choice I made after that night, every risk, every success came from surviving something I shouldn't have. And when I saw you, when I realized who you were, it was like life handing me the map back. Grace's eyes shone, though she didn't look away. That's a lot to carry. I'm not asking you to carry it, he said. I'm just saying it out loud so it doesn't sit between us. They fell quiet again. The room felt smaller, warmer. A gull cried faintly outside the window. Grace folded the note and slipped it back into her pocket. You know, she said after a while, for years I blamed her for leaving me too soon. But tonight, standing here, I think she might have been waiting for this. For us to find each other. Somehow. Cole turned toward her fully. Maybe she knew we'd both need reminding that forward doesn't mean forgetting. Grace laughed softly, blinking back tears. You sound like her? Then maybe I'm learning from the right teacher. They stood there, both smiling, the air humming with unspoken things. He reached out slowly, as if asking permission, and she didn't move away. His hand brushed hers, then closed around it not tightly. Just enough. Her fingers trembled once, then settled. Neither spoke. They just stood before Evelyn's smile, a nurse frozen in an old photograph. A woman whose mercy had stretched across 2 decades to bring them here. The hallway clock ticked somewhere far off. Grace squeezed his hand lightly, breaking the stillness. You know, you're allowed to breathe again, she whispered. He smiled. I was afraid to. Why? Because if I breathe, I might say something I can't take back. She met his gaze, eyes bright in the lamplight. Then maybe you should. He opened his mouth, then stopped. Instead, he drew a slow, shaky breath and simply said, Thank you. She nodded. You're welcome. And that was enough for now. They stayed like that, hands joined, the quiet stretching long and tender, while the harbor lights outside flickered against the glass, steady, patient, and impossibly alive. The first whisper came 2 days after the council meeting. Grace was sorting through a shipment of canned goods when her phone buzzed once, twice, then again. Messages from 3 different volunteers. Have you seen the news? She wiped her hands on a towel and opened the link. The headline made her stomach twist. PR chief accuses developer of manipulating local leaders. He's letting sentiment run his business. Below it, a statement unsigned but unmistakably sourced claimed that Cole Harrington's romantic involvement with a community director had endangered investor confidence and that emotions had compromised professional judgment. Grace stared at the screen until her vision blurred. Her pulse thudded in her throat. She didn't want to believe it, but every sentence read like Laura Kent's polished venom. She closed the phone, pressing it hard against the table, as if to keep the words inside. Outside. Children laughed in the garden, chasing bubbles in the afternoon light. The sound felt cruelly normal. By evening, the story had spread across every local station. Cole hadn't commented. Neither had Laura. But the silence itself felt damning, the kind that made gossip grow teeth. Grace barely slept that night. Part of her told herself to trust him. Another part, the one that had been burned before, whispered, You should have known better. The next morning, Cole stood in the doorway of the old rec center, tie loose, jaw tight. Evan Mallory stood beside him, tablet in hand. You're sure? Cole asked. His voice was steady, but his eyes weren't. Evan nodded grimly. Found the trail this morning. Payment authorized to an out-of-state consultant, same account that ran those anonymous posts about Grace. The signature code matches Laura's clearance level. She routed it through a shell vendor. Cole shut his eyes. Jesus, I think she wanted to save your reputation, Evan said quietly. By tanking hers, by tanking theirs, by hurting people who didn't deserve it. Cole muttered. Evan hesitated. What do you want to do? Cole looked through the window toward the harbor, where the water glinted bright and cold. The only thing that makes sense? Tell the truth. By noon. Laura Kent stood across from him in the foundation office posture, perfect. Lipstick precise, eyes defiant. You think you're the first idealist to fall for a sob story, she said coolly. I did what needed to be done. You were losing control. You were building a reputation around sentiment, not strength. Cole didn't raise his voice. You slandered an innocent woman. You turned my mother's name into a headline. And you called it strategy. Damage control, Laura corrected. I was protecting you. No, he said quietly. You were protecting what you thought I used to be. He placed a folder on the table, printed emails, payment logs, the damning receipts. You're done here. Laura blinked once, just once, as if she hadn't expected him to actually say it. You'll regret this, Cole. The press will eat you alive without me. He met her gaze. Let them, but they'll choke on the truth first. She gathered her purse, spine stiff, and walked out without another word. The door clicked shut behind her, soft, final. Evan exhaled. What now? Cole looked at the stack of documents. Now we've fixed what she broke. That afternoon, he called a press conference on the rec center, steps the same place where volunteers had handed out blankets during the storm. Grace stood at the edge of the crowd, her heart pounding. She hadn't spoken to him since the article. She didn't even know if she wanted to. When he stepped up to the microphone, there were no cue cards, no PR staff, just him, raw and visible. Good afternoon, he began. For those who've read the reports, you deserve the truth, not spin, not damage control. The recent accusations were not written by an independent source. They were manufactured by a member of my own executive team without my knowledge. He paused, voice steady but low. That person is no longer with the foundation. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. He continued, each word deliberate. I came to Harbor Point to build something. Instead, I learned something. That sometimes, the most important structure isn't made of concrete or steel. It's made of trust, and ours was violated from the inside. He took a slow breath. Effective today. I'm ordering an independent ethics audit of every project tied to my foundation. No exceptions, no red tape. And beyond that, we're establishing a fund to help small-town partners protect themselves from misinformation and smear tactics. No community should have to fight for its dignity alone. The reporters scribbled frantically, but the crowd locals, volunteers, kids from the community house listened in silence. Then he looked toward Grace, found her instantly, as if he'd known exactly where she'd stand. I also owe this town an apology, he said. Not for caring about it, for letting the people who work for me believe caring was weakness. A long breath. It's not. For a moment, no one moved. Then someone clapped. Walt, the veteran, started it a single, firm sound. Others joined, hesitant, then stronger. The applause spread like warmth through cold air. Grace felt her chest loosen. The fear that had coiled there for days began to unspool. She hadn't been wrong to trust him. Not this time. Meanwhile, across town, Ray Sutter sat in his office, hands shaking as he scrolled through his own messages. The whispers had turned. Half the town now knew about his attempt to blackmail Grace during the storm. When she appeared in his doorway that evening, composed, steady, he didn't even pretend. Surprise? Grace, he said hoarsely. This isn't a good time. It's the right time, she replied. Behind her stood two witnesses, Walt and the mayor's assistant. You tried to use a crisis to buy a signature. You owe this town an apology. Ray looked at their faces, realized he had no defense left, and sagged into his chair. "You'll get it," he muttered, "and my resignation." Grace nodded once. "That'll do." She turned and walked out, the door closing gently behind her. That evening, the sun dipped behind the harbor, painting the sky in streaks of rose and gold. The rec center steps were empty now, save for Cole, who sat quietly, head bowed. Grace approached, the sound of her shoes soft against the concrete. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes, I did," he answered. "You deserved it. You didn't owe me anything." He looked up, eyes tired but calm. "I owed you the truth. All of it." For a moment, neither spoke. The sea murmured somewhere below, the air tinged with salt and dusk. Grace finally said, "You realize this town's never had a billionaire apologize to it before." Cole smiled faintly. "Then I hope it's the last time they'll need one." The wind off the water lifted her hair, brushed his sleeve. He didn't reach for her hand this time. He just sat there beside her, watching the light fade, knowing that the hardest part of rebuilding wasn't pouring new foundations, it was earning back what should never have been broken. By December, Harbor Point smelled of salt, pine, and new beginnings. The first snow came early, a soft dusting that melted on contact with the warm shingles of the newly repaired community house. The fresh roof beams still carried the scent of raw wood, sharp and clean, a promise written into grain. A small crowd gathered under the portico that morning, bundled in scarves and mittens. The mayor stood beside a wide red ribbon that fluttered in the cold wind. A brass plaque gleamed on the new wing, "Evelyn House," in honor of those who keep others alive. Live forward. Grace Whitman stood near the front, hands clasped around a pair of silver scissors. Her navy dress peeked out beneath a gray wool coat, hem brushing the tops of her boots. It wasn't the gala dress anymore. It was hers now, claimed and remade, beside her. Cole Harrington adjusted his scarf, hair dusted with snowflakes. He looked less like a billionaire and more like someone who belonged, collar turned up, gloves worn at the edges, the faintest trace of sawdust still on his sleeve from helping finish the porch railings that morning. The mayor cleared his throat. "Today, we dedicate Evelyn House a space for community care, for the storms we can't predict, and for the courage we already have. To Grace Whitman, for leading with heart. To Cole Harrington, for proving that generosity can outlast profit. And to everyone here who believed this place was worth saving." Applause rippled through the crowd. Grace felt her throat tighten as she looked at the sign again. Her mother's face smiled from the framed photo inside the entryway, that same winter parka, that same steady gaze. She thought of the note pinned to the dress all those months ago. "Wear this when you decide to live forward." She hadn't realized until now that living forward wasn't about movement. It was about opening to change, to risk, to being seen. Cole leaned closer and murmured, "You ready?" Grace smiled, eyes glistening. "You're asking the wrong Whitman." Together, they cut the ribbon. Cheers broke out. Walt saluted with a paper cup of cocoa. Children darted past them into the hall, laughter echoing off fresh paint and polished floors. The smell of cinnamon rolls drifted from the new kitchen. Inside, the Evelyn wing shone sunlight glancing off tiled walls and stainless counters. A medical room stocked with first aid supplies. A storm shelter with solid doors and reinforced glass. A small plaque by the entrance read, "Funded by the people who wouldn't give up." Grace walked the hallway slowly, fingers brushing the smooth plaster. The community had raised half of what was needed. Cole's foundation had quietly covered the rest. No speeches, no press releases, just action, done right. She paused beneath her mother's photo. Snowlight shimmered across the frame. Cole came to stand beside her, his reflection joining hers in the glass. "She'd be proud," he said quietly. Grace swallowed. "Of you too." He gave a small, rueful smile. "I hope of both of us. Took me long enough to earn it." They wandered out the side door to the back steps, the air crisp and sweet with the smell of pine. The garden stretched toward the bay, winter bare but alive. Rows of evergreens and the low hum of a generator tucked neatly away. Across the harbor, crews worked on the new mixed-use site 2 blocks inland, just as promised. "Looks like your plan's actually happening," she said. He nodded. "Ground broke last week. Shuttle vans are already running between the ferry lot and downtown. We even named one after Walt." She laughed softly. "He'll never stop talking about it. I'm counting on it." They stood side by side, breath fogging in the air. The harbor bells chimed once, faint and clear. Cole turned toward her. "You know, I've given speeches all over the world. None of them mattered like the one I didn't plan here." Grace tilted her head. "Which one was that?" "The night you spoke at the gala," he said. "I couldn't look away. You stood there in that short navy dress, talking about dignity and belonging like they were tangible things. You didn't just change the room, you changed me." She looked down, smiling. "You always were dramatic." He shook his head. "No, honest, maybe, for once." The wind stirred her hair, brushing it against his cheek. Her voice softened. "You want to know something?" "Cole, what I'm not hiding anymore." He blinked. "From what? From being seen, from being judged, from living forward, like she told me to." Something in his expression shifted the guarded humor. The practiced distance, all of it fell away. He took a step closer, slow, careful. "The way you approach something sacred. You sure about that?" he whispered. She met his gaze steadily. "I am." He reached up, brushed a stray snowflake from her hair. The touch lingered, feather light. Then, without hesitation, he leaned in, not rushed, not stolen, but offered and kissed her. It wasn't a movie kiss or a grand finale. It was quiet, certain, real, the kind that said, "We've earned this." When they finally pulled back, the world felt changed not by fireworks, but by peace. From the open windows came the sound of children laughing, the thump of a bouncing ball, Walt's deep voice telling a story that made someone snort with laughter. The community house pulsed with life, steady as a heartbeat. Snowflakes drifted down again, catching in Grace's hair, melting against Cole's collar. She looked out over the bay and whispered, "She'd say this was enough. You know, not perfect, just enough." He smiled. "Then we'll keep it that way." The wind shifted, carrying the smell of salt and cinnamon, of new wood and memory. The gulls wheeled overhead, crying against the pale sky. Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. The plaque behind them gleamed in the fading light. "Live forward." And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about what came next. She was simply there in the warmth of a rebuilt house, beside the man who'd finally understood what home really meant. Sometimes, healing begins where we least expect it, in the quiet choice to be seen again. Grace thought courage meant rebuilding roofs and budgets, but it turned out to be something smaller, harder, stepping out of her own shadow. And Cole learned that redemption isn't about paying debts. It's about showing up where it matters, without applause. This story isn't about a dress or even love. It's about what happens when two people stop running from the parts of themselves they've buried: grief, guilt, tenderness, and let those parts breathe in the open air. Maybe that's what living forward really means. Not forgetting the storms that shaped us, but learning to walk through the sunlight afterward bruised, wiser, and still open to grace. Thank you for being here with us, for listening, feeling, and believing in stories that remind us we're not alone. Every like, every share, every subscribe helps us keep this little light alive, to tell more stories that heal, connect, and touch the soul. From all of us at Shining Stories, thank you for choosing kindness, one story at a time.